He's everyone's favorite U.S. Senator, and he's back with a vengeance.
More free stuff, Pete.
There we go. The Bernie Bros back in the saddle. Bernie Sanders.
I can get you less for more, Pete.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much there, Bernie. Bernie is ready to let it rip on the 32-hour work week. That's right. Here he was on MSNBC last night as the commie, the socialist, the man himself, Bernie Sanders, gets set to roll out the 32-hour work week. Let's take a listen to what Bernie had to say last night with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. Here we go.
Legislation like that work, actually?
Well, for a start, the 40-hour week, as I recall, was established in 1940. All right, that is 84 years ago. There have been a few modest changes in the economy over the last 84 years. And what's gone on is workers today are far more productive. I mean, think about all of the technology and equipment that's out there today. So the question that we're going to be asking tomorrow is who benefits from all of the changes that have taken place in the economy, the new technology, and, by the way, the artificial intelligence and robotics that's sitting around the corner that it's going to transform the entire economy. Most people, if you got a job today, it's going to be very different 10, 15 years ago from today if you have that job. So what we are saying is with all of this new technology and an increase in worker productivity, workers should benefit from these changes, not just large corporations and the stockholders.
All right. There he is, right on cue. Bernie Sanders set to introduce this piece of legislation that would establish a 32-hour work week as the standard across the U.S., while, of course, mandating that workers do not lose pay. That's the catch. Tell me you've never run a business. Tell me you've never run a lemonade stand without telling me you've never run a lemonade stand.
I was going to ask the main question. When do you suppose the last time Bernie worked 32 hours in a week was? Ever. I think he thought he was arguing for overtime for employees.
I think the answer is never, considering when he was a young man, he was kicked out of his commune for not cleaning the dishes.
Not doing anything.
And then he got on the government dole, in his late 30s, and he's been soaking the taxpayer in Vermont ever since. I mean, the guy is literally a bum, and he bummed his way through pushing communism and socialism.
A best-selling bum, Pete.
Yeah, a best-selling bum who owns 3 homes.
Several books on Amazon. Check it out.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, he is the all-time hypocrite.
Bingo.
And now, here he is back in the saddle. I guess he figures it's been a little bit for him, and it has. When's the last time we talked about Bernie Sanders' crappy ideas? Now here he is, set to introduce this legislation for the 32-hour work week while mandating that workers do not lose pay. Not only has Bernie never run a lemonade stand, he was the guy who went up to the lemonade stand and asked for free lemonade. That's who Bernie Sanders is in a nutshell, and that's who he's always been. So you look at this and you say, okay, how many small business owners are listening right now here in Kansas City, right? You run a business, you're a manager, and Bernie Sanders passes this law that says you can only have your employees work 32 hours a week, and you got to pay them the same. By the way, when Bernie says people are much more efficient today than they are now, that may be true in certain, tech jobs. But if you run a restaurant and suddenly your cook is only working 32 hours a week, your head chef, well, either you do one of two things. You got to hire somebody else to fill the other 8 hours, or you have to shut down your restaurant for those 8 hours. Those are your only two options, right? If you have a chef at a restaurant who goes from 40 to 32 hours a week, there's no other way around it. You either hire somebody else to fill the 8-hour gap, or you close the restaurant. Either way, it costs you your bottom line. If your restaurant's not open, what's going to happen? You're not going to make as much money. If you have to hire somebody else, your costs go up. So you see how this works. This is somebody who has no idea about regular Main Street business, has no idea about small business, and he makes it all about the billionaires. Wall Street.
Well, and the silly conflation about 1940 is if that, wait a minute, what? Like that's a whole different thing. It's irrelevant.
It's got nothing to do with anything. It's just kind of 84 years ago. And I love Chris Hayes. I mean, chuckling along like the seal. Yeah, the seal that he is, and the complete goober that he is. As if it's like, guys, have either of you ever interacted with a small business person? Like ever in your life? The only conclusion I can come to is no. But if you're someone who is just a manager, a small business owner in Kansas City, what does this do for you? A 32-hour work week, if Bernie Sanders makes you implement that. 913-408-7957. We'll get to more of this after the news on KCMO. I'm reading through the 32-hour work week plan from Bernie Sanders. It's called the 32-Hour Work Week Act. Senate Chairman Bernie Sanders. Here it is. It's one page long. It's not one of these. I'll give Bernie that much. He didn't spend very long on this.
See what's in it.
Yeah.
Gonna have to read it.
There's not much to this thing, right? Here's what he writes here. While weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower than they were 50 years ago after adjusting for inflation. By the way, whose fault is that, Bernie? Goodness gracious. You guys want to know why the money doesn't go as far as it did 50 years ago? Maybe because the last 50 years, this government has done nothing but go off the gold standard, spend like drunken sailors. Apologies to any drunken sailors out there. Yeah. I know. Right. They all get upset when I say that. And do nothing but grow the government and devalue the dollar by the year. And then you're like, gosh, what happened to the middle class? Maybe look in the mirror at what you numbskulls in Washington, D.C. have been doing for 50 years. This is classic Bernie. Spend, more government. Inflation skyrockets. Oh, what happens? Inflation goes up. Okay, what do we do about this? Spend more money. It's like, no. That's how we got here.
Bernie's plan account for daylight savings time. I wonder. So 31-hour work week or 33?
Yeah, I don't know where he factors that in. He says it's time that working families, not just CEOs and wealthy shareholders, are able to benefit from increased productivity so that they can enjoy more leisure time, family time, education and cultural opportunities, and less stress. My goodness. Are we trying to be Italy here?
Right.
I mean, when I went there 2 summers ago, literally from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, no one's doing anything. People are sleeping. It's like...
Ain't nobody broke out with work before 10 in Paris.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right, too.
One question I have for Bernie. People who work 32 hours a week and are paid hourly, do they get the 40-hour pay?
That's what he's trying to say.
I think so.
That's kind of
I think that, well, once again, you are then inflating the economy. You will create massive inflation there, Bernie.
Isn't the 40-hour pay as archaic as the 40-hour work week?
Yeah, well, good point,
if that's
too.
outdated, then surely the pay scale's outdated.
So Bernie goes on the right here in his one-page 32-hour work week act, 913-408-7957. He says here, a recent 4-day week pilot program of 3,000 workers at over 60 companies in the UK showed that happy workers were more productive. Over 70% of workers reported greater satisfaction with their time and feeling less burnt out, while participating businesses saw a 35% average increase in revenue. Now, I'd like to get behind some of those numbers a little bit, Bernie.
What kinds of businesses?
Yeah, what kinds of businesses exactly does that apply to? And on top of that, this notion that we need more leisure time, more family time. Heck, no one's having families, Bernie, because you guys are making it more difficult for people to have a parent at home, buy a home, live on, a single income, get kids to daycare. I was talking to a friend in the neighborhood. She's helping her kid out with daycare right now. The daycare is $3,200 a month.
Crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
In this town. One kid.
Try 2, maybe 3.
It's insane.
You can't afford it.
You can't afford it. You just can't. So Bernie talking about, family time and enjoy more time on their education. I'm pretty sure we're plenty educated, depending on your definition, or we're just a bunch of lemmings and idiots. But either way, we got plenty of education. And how about cultural opportunities? That's on the list as well. How about we, save that for the other, let's see, how many hours are there in a week? 24 times 7, we're pushing what, 200? 168 hours a week. If you sleep 8 hours a night, and that's generous, I certainly don't do that. If you sleep 8 hours a night, take off 56 hours, you got 112 hours in the week left. Take 40 off of that, you got 72 hours to do what you want. If in 72 hours of your spare time, you can't find time for leisure, family, education, cultural opportunities, then you're mismanaging your time. So the 32-hour work week would, per Bernie Sanders on this one-pager, reduce the standard work week from 40 to 32 hours over 4 years by lowering the maximum hours threshold for overtime compensation for non-exempt employees. Require overtime pay at the time and a half for workdays longer than 8 hours. And overtime pay at double a worker's regular pay for workdays longer than 12 hours. Protect workers' pay and benefits to ensure that a reduction in the work week does not cause a loss in pay. And then he lists a bunch of the unions that are backing this crappy idea. Because, of course. This is everything in a nutshell that explains why Bernie Sanders is living in La La Land. Or somewhere else. But for the most appropriate language I can use on the radio, Bernie Sanders is living in La La Land. And it's one of the reasons that this guy has spent a career in D.C. and not making money in the private sector, because he literally would not be able to do it. And Bernie could always start with a staff, by the way. I'm sure his staff is not working 32-hour work weeks. I'm sure his chief of staff is plenty busy this morning and has been all week long and passed the 32-hour work week mark by like Wednesday morning. So if he wants to start the trend, he can do that. But until he does, I don't want to hear from Bernie Sanders anymore. No thanks. Meantime, things that are actually going on in Washington, D.C. Yesterday, the TikTok ban passed the House of Representatives. So this is something I'm a huge fan of and a big proponent of. And I don't say it as like, old man, get off my lawn. I've got Instagram, I've got Facebook, I've got X, but I've never downloaded TikTok because it doesn't do much different from Instagram as far as I can tell. And the less connections I have to anything in China, the better off I am. And no, that's not anti-Chinese. It's anti-Chinese Communist Party. It's anti-Chinese government, which the less we can be involved with them as a country and as everyday citizens, the better off we're all going to be. So the House overwhelmingly approved a bill that would ban TikTok from operating in the United States or force a sale. So basically what would happen here is if the parent company, ByteDance, divested itself of TikTok, then they could remain operating in the United States. If ByteDance does not divest itself of TikTok, then if this were to pass the U.S. Senate and then be signed by Joe Biden, what you would theoretically then have happen is you would be unable to download TikTok on your phone, and it would be blocked off to all 170 million Americans who currently use TikTok. Now, what's interesting is this passed by a bipartisan basis. So here in Kansas City, Mark Alford and Sharice Davids and Emmanuel Cleaver all voted for it. That's fairly unusual. While their opponents of the bill, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most far-left members in the House, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of the more conservative members of the House, voted against it. So how does that make sense? What's going on here? It was wildly bipartisan on both ends, those in favor and then also those against. Well, those in favor, I think, are on the right side of this, by the way. I'm not concerned about Facebook benefiting tremendously from this. They will in the short term if TikTok were to ultimately get banned from the United States, because Instagram would do well. However, Google could set up its own version of TikTok. Amazon, Microsoft, they could all invest in a TikTok-like app if they wanted to. It's not like Meta is going to be the only potential winner here. Heck, Meta has tried to compete with Elon Musk and X. They started this app called Threads, which is basically a carbon copy of Twitter. And there's no one on it but porn stars and bots. I've used it. I've seen it. I try to go on there and be engaging on it, and it's complete trash. So I go on it once a week, and I'm reminded of how bad the app is. But Mark Zuckerberg literally tried to compete with Twitter, and he's failing at it. So you can't just tell me that, oh, Mark Zuckerberg's going to be our overlord. Well, only if other major tech platforms don't try to compete with him. And I believe they will if TikTok gets banned. So I'm not really worried about that. I'm worried about protecting American safety because there is no bigger enemy on the planet right now for the United States than the Chinese Communist Party. And as long as they have any kind of a foothold in TikTok, that is a national security threat, hands down.